Alright, not only do reports say, but many believe the Lakers will run a 10-man rotation at the absolute most, which would align with what JJ Redick did with their team last season, often running a 10 if not even 9 or 8-man rotation, which obviously even got trimmed down to a 7 and even at times a 5-man rotation during the postseason. But if we're talking about a regular season and what they're likely to turn to at the beginning of the season, I imagine it won't be bigger than a 10-man rotation. And well, if that does turn out to be true, then obviously there's gonna be a few guys on the outside looking in, one of which could be their draft pick from last summer, that being Dalton Knecht. And well, if you ask me, I think he'll be in a battle for that 10th spot, likely between himself and Gabe Vincent, a guy that's kind of on the borderline of the rotation, kind of being partially replaced by Marcus Smart, a guy that simply fills his role better than he does right now, filling the defensive role better than Gabe Vincent, maybe not as good from a 3-point shooting standpoint, but not a whole lot worse, and I imagine they'll turn to Marcus Smart more than Gabe Vincent, so that probably could and likely would be the pathway to playing time for Dalton Knecht at the expense of Gabe Vincent. So we'll talk about what it could look like, if there will be a training camp battle between them, or simply a rotation battle, who currently has the upper hand with it, who could take the upper hand throughout the season, and likely what JJ Redick is looking for from both of them, and if they can prove it and if they can show it to him, who could get the beneficiary of more minutes in their current rotation. We'll talk about that and try to break it all down here. And well, I guess starting with their numbers production from last season, here we have Dalton Knecht who put up roughly 9 points per game, 3 rebounds per game, roughly 1 assist per game, shooting 46.1% from the field and 37.6% from 3, while attempting roughly 4.5 per game. Pretty good and obviously a lot more offensive centric rather than defensive centric for Dalton Knecht. If you want to throw in some defensive numbers and throw in defensive BPM or defensive EPM, here's where it goes bad for Dalton Knecht. Having a negative 1.7 defensive BPM, then if you want to talk about defensive EPM, having the 8th worst EPM rating in the entire league last season, having a negative 2.3 defensive EPM rating, ranking in the first percentile, which is the bottom one, not the top 1%, and that's obviously not a good thing for him. Definitely the thing that he needs to improve upon. The offense is very good for him, and that's not a worry for him either right now or in the future with him, but the defense obviously is. Then for Gabe Vincent, he played roughly 21 minutes per game, averaging 6.4 points per game, roughly 1 rebound and 1 assist per game, shooting 40% from the field and 35.3% for 3. You know, definitely not as good compared to Dalton Knecht. Offensively wasn't quite what Knecht did, neither in regard to scoring production, shooting, or simply efficiency in general, wasn't quite up to Dalton Knecht. Obviously isn't the spark that Knecht can be, isn't the guy that can actually have design plays around him, and a guy that you can have draw a bunch of attention away from ball handlers like LeBron, Austin, and Luka. Gabe Vincent's not quite that player. He is more of an off-ball kind of corner and wing 3-point shooter, occasional backdoor cutter, occasional ball handler that can sometimes create for himself, but he's not on the offensive level of a Dalton Knecht, even as a rookie. However, he definitely did fare better on defense to their team. If we're talking about defensive numbers and comparing them to Dalton Knecht's defensive numbers, for defensive BPM, Gabe Vincent having a negative 0.1 rating, obviously not great, but a whole lot better than Dalton Knecht. And with Gabe Vincent, who's not exactly a defensive playmaker, doesn't get a ton of steals per game, even per 36 minutes, only at 1.2 steals per 36, not exactly great, isn't a passing lane pest, but is more of a simply disciplined defender, doesn't foul that much on defense, is a decent screen navigator and all around a pretty decent defender, and that's shown better by his defensive EPM rating, posting a plus 0.4 defensive EPM rating, which is roughly 2 points better than Dalton Knecht, who again was a bottom 8 defender per defensive EPM, so he definitely did fare better on defense than Dalton Knecht. And well, no matter what we look at it, whether you're talking about the numbers and kind of like we talked about here with their defense, or with the eye tests and what they both showed on the court, this definitely will factor in the decision of JJ Redick and which then he will pick between for their final rotation spot. I mean, you really can't have a guy that's not at least average on defense or somewhere close to it at a somewhat consistent level, which unfortunately Dalton Knecht has really not been and has not been able to do for their team. You know, even with the offense, and we'll talk more about that in a bit here, it's been rather disappointing for Dalton Knecht. His lack of commitment, not really the defensive talent or ability to be at least a decent defender, it's simply the commitment and not buying into defense for him. So if he can't change that, then definitely show it as early as training camp. then he likely won't get that final rotation spot for their team. I mean, I'm not saying that he has become a great defender on the court, not even an average defender, but somewhere right below that point, enough to where he doesn't hurt them, or at least not very often, to where they can take advantage of him on offense and, again, simply not be hurt by him on defense. That should be the goal for Dalton Knecht. And if he can't get to that point, then they probably will, and probably will have to go with Gabe Vincent over him. You know, I guess the final thing I'd say with that, and with the defense between them, is kind of in the favor of Dalton Knecht, and that he'll probably be helped by Marcus Smart. You know, with the addition of Smart and him being a very good defender, a better backcourt defender than Gabe Vincent, but a not so great offensive player, this actually might be a pathway for Knecht to help out their offense and maybe even help out Marcus Smart too. You know, taking him away from a bigger role offensively, kind of opening up their offense and drawing attention away from them on offense. You know, whether that be Marcus Smart or any other player on the court with Dalton Knecht, they can definitely benefit from the attention that he draws on the court. You know, I've often talked about this, but Knecht's probably the one guy on their team that's a really true off-ball threat, not only as a stationary three-point shooter, but as a legitimate off-ball mover. Maybe not compared to a Klay Thompson or Steph Curry, but kind of a tier right below that point, to where you literally have to pay attention to him and pretty much have to stay attached to his hip as a defender. I mean, if you don't and give him even a few feet of space, then he has enough room to get off a three-point shot. So they already have Marcus Smart filling that defensive backcourt role for their team, that point of attack defender and screen navigator off the bench for them. That probably makes them less dependent on Gabe Vincent, much less than they were last season, likely trimming his playing time from roughly 21 minutes per game to somewhere between 12 to 15 minutes per game in my opinion, therefore potentially opening up a pathway for Dalton Knecht. And again, obviously if they need more offense and not as much defense with Gabe Vincent out there on the court. However, that's not to say that Gabe Vincent is bad or was a slouch offensively for their team. Like I said, he did shoot roughly 35% from 3, kind of around league average, and if you actually take out October and November from last season, he actually shot about 38% from their team. Not to mention on a fairly high volume amount of 3-point shots, taking roughly 4.5 per game in 21 minutes per game, that translating to well over 7 per 36 minutes. Even having a 2-month stretch where he was one of, if not the best 3-point shooter on their entire team, so he definitely does have good offensive moments, even led their team in a few games in points, and does have some good sparks off the bench. You know, obviously it's not Dalton Knecht, neither in regard to the scoring production, 3-point shooting, backdoor cutting, or athletic ability on the court, but if you're looking for the better all-around option and the better balance, then you probably would point to Gabe Vincent here over Dalton Knecht. And well, that's kind of what it comes down to for JJ Redick. Does he want the more offensive spark and go with Dalton Knecht? You know, maybe in some matchups, but in other matchups, it's probably better to have the better two-way option and the guy that's likely to give you more on both ends of the court, that being Gabe Vincent. Again, maybe and hopefully that will change with Dalton Knecht. Him improving on defense where he's not a liability out there most of the time, more committed, taking better advantage of his athletic ability and translating that better to defense. If he can do that, then there's definitely a better argument for him, but if we're talking about that final and 10th spot in the rotation, then I feel like you might be able to make a better argument for Gabe Vincent, and probably the guy that JJ Redick is more likely to go with here too. Again, there definitely are pathways to playing time for Dalton Knecht, whether you're talking about him improving on defense, or even a different pathway like somebody getting hurt. Obviously that would be a different route for him, but as of right now, he's probably the last guy on the outside looking in. Might be some matchups where he gets playing time, but at this point he might not be an every game rotation player for their team if there's not more improvement to his overall game. And well, with all of that being said here, what do you guys think? How do you feel about the Lakers rotation, and if Dalton Knecht will be a part of it, if there could be a battle between him and Gabe Vincent, who would win that battle and what JJ Redick will ultimately go with between them? How do you think they'll pan out, and how do you feel about the future of Dalton Knecht on their team and potentially in their rotation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. But I think that'll pretty much do it for this one. And if you enjoyed the video, then I would greatly appreciate it if you drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and hit that notification bell to never miss out when I upload a video. But as always, thank you for watching and have a great day or night.